This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. You're looking live there. In just minutes, we expect to get an update from Las Vegas officials on the latest in their investigation into the deadly shooting last Sunday that took the lives of 58 people. We'll take you there live when it begins. But first, what do we know about the investigation right now? Several federal investigators returned to search the Mesquite home of shooter Stephen Paddock, while other investigators met with his brother. This is first responders recount for the first time the moment when they encountered Paddock in that Mandalay Bay hotel room. Correspondent Dan Springer joins us live from Vegas as we wait for authorities with what we're learning today. Good evening, Dan.
Yeah, and Bret, we're hoping to have new information from police. It's appeared over the last weekend that, this investigation has really hit a wall. In fact, over the weekend, they spent a lot of time just retracing steps that they had taken earlier. For example, yesterday, FBI agents conducted a second search of Stephen Paddock's home in Mesquite, Nevada. They filed for a second federal search warrant after interviewing Paddock's girlfriend, who also lives there. Late Saturday night, police met Eric Paddock, the shooter's brother, as he arrived in Las Vegas to handle some family business. FBI profilers interviewed him for 4 hours. He was already interviewed once at his home in Orlando, Florida. We're learning even more about the extensive planning before the massacre. The killer calculated his aim and screwed shut the emergency exit door next to his room to slow the first responders.
It's like a deadly game of hide and seek, because when you're the one hiding, you always know where the person that's looking for you is before they see you. I remember thinking, man, I wish I had my dog with me, because, it's nice to have him lead the team.
Those SWAT team members saying the room looked like a gun store, with them tripping over rifles and ammunition. In all, 58 people were killed, nearly 500 injured. So many have helped in the healing process. Jason Aldean, the country star who was on stage when the gunfire began, was back in Las Vegas yesterday visiting some of the injured. His wife, Brittany, joined him and praised the victims for their strength. On Saturday, Vice President Mike Pence was out here also lending his prayers for the nation. Bret?
Dan, we've watched officials over the past few days struggle with that question again and again about motive. Do we think that tonight that they are indicating any change, at least heading into this briefing that we're moments away from, on that front?
Absolutely no indication that they've had a major breakthrough. In fact, most of the people that I've talked to have said that this guy was such an enigma, so unusual, that we might never know. The FBI profilers are very good at the job of, piecing together a person's history and coming up with a trigger that sent them on their way to this horrible tragedy. But this trigger could have been 11 months ago when he started to build up his arsenal of weapons. It could have been another trigger a month ago, 3 weeks ago. We just don't know. And the FBI has given no indication that they're very close to solving this mystery. Bret?
Hearing from those first responders as they went into that Mandalay Bay room, you can hear the danger that was involved there. There were some thoughts about whether there was anybody else in that room. There was somebody, there was a charger that didn't fit his phone. Let's listen in, Dan, to the authorities. They just took the podium there in Las Vegas.
All right. For those of you who may not know, I'm Sheriff Lombardo of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Today, I'm going to give you an update where we currently are with the investigation, and then I'll give you some insight to where we're going with the investigation, and then I'll be happy to answer a small number of questions. Okay, so in the days since our last briefing, investigators from the LVMPD, along with many agents from the FBI and ATF, have continued working around the clock on the 1 October shooting. Today I'll provide you with some information, but mostly I hope to clarify or provide more updated information on some of the details that have been reported in the media. A number of you have already reported that the brother of the suspect is in town, and yes, he is. We are in contact with him, along with other family members. I will not discuss what came out of those interviews, but every piece of information we get is one more piece of the puzzle in this case. Last week, we talked about the single person whose action helped pinpoint the location of the suspect, and that was the Mandalay Bay security guard Jesus Campos. As you might imagine, Mr. Campos was not only injured when he was fired upon, as he did his room check about the door alarm down the hall from the suspect's room, but he was also extremely shaken up by what happened to him. He was able to confirm for us exactly what he heard and saw in the moments before he was shot. Mary Lou Danley, the suspect's live-in girlfriend, we are still speaking with Miss Danley about the suspect's movements, gun purchases, and anything else we need to know about him and how he had planned his assault. And who he came in contact with during the planning phase. We have uncovered no evidence to show there was a second shooter. We have uncovered over 200 instances of the suspects traveling throughout Las Vegas, and he has never been seen with anyone else. We have no evidence or intelligence that the suspect was linked or had affiliation with any known terrorist groups or ideologies. In coordination with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, a comprehensive picture is being drawn as to the suspect's mental state, and currently we do not believe there is one particular event in the suspect's life for us to key on. We believe he decided to take the lives he did, and he had a very purposeful plan that he carried out. So where are we at with the property retrieval? As of yesterday, the personal effects of concert goers as well as items that belong to the victims are now being returned at the Family Assistance Center located at the Convention Center. They have located items from lots A, B, C, and D. They have placed them in those categories, and if you go to FBI.gov and click on the banner associated with the 1 October shooting, it will define which lots are being available as we speak. As far as I know from visiting there earlier today, lots A and B are available, and C and D are yet to be determined. First and most important is I want to say the FBI, the Red Cross, and City and County Fire are doing an amazing job. This is not an easy task to undertake, but their process is efficient. And even though we have been talking about the numbers of people who attended the concert and the number of victims injured or killed, you really don't understand the magnitude until you see the rows and tables of personal belongings that left behind as the people fled the venue. So moving forward, we anticipate being at the Route 91 site for at least another week, along with the room at the Mandalay Bay. As I've said from day one, we want to figure out the why to this, and we'd like to know the motive. That is our most important goal, to prevent any further action associated with another individual who is contemplating this, or what exactly went along in the suspect's mind to enable him to pull off such a complicated event. So moving forward, barring any critical information obtained during the week, the next press conference will be conducted at the end of the week, Friday. So at this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
There was a deposition that came out today from 2013 that said he was taking Valium. Have you found any medications?
We have found some evidence of medications. I'm not at liberty to discuss that.
Can you tell us about the note? Was that to cause damage? What were those notes?
What note?
The note that was in the suspect's room.
There was not a note in the suspect's room. We recovered a document that had numbers associated to it, and I'm not at liberty to make a guess on what that was for. It could be. We're figuring that out.
Sheriff, also in the suspect's room, according to accounts we heard last night, there were drills. According to other accounts, the guard, Jesus Campos, heard drilling in the room. What drilling was done, and what do you think it was to accomplish?
So the question is, what drilling was done, or what was the intent of the suspect? There was drilling done. It was to the doorway, adjacent wall to the doorway. And just an assumption would be to either place a camera or to place a rifle.
Can I follow that?
But the drilling was not completed.
Did Officer Campos hear drilling?
Yes, he did.
How's Mr. Campos doing? Do you have any information?
Can I finish his question, sir?
And he knocked because of the drilling?
No. There's never been anything out in the public forum about knocking. He was investigating an open door. He became of the drilling sound.
Sheriff, what time exactly did Jesus Campos sustain, the injury? What's the timeline? What time exactly?
Bear with me while I get that for you. Well, it's fairly simple for me to obtain. What was the question, ma'am?
Can I also ask, in the days...
What was the original question?
What time he got sustained the injury?
21:59. That would be 9:59.
Sheriff, you checked that the gunman was practicing shooting before this incident that you know of?
No, I can't confirm that.
Sheriff, are you saying that the security guard was injured, Mr. Campos was injured at before 10 p.m. and the shots were then fired at 10 p.m. into the crowd? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I don't know where you're getting your numbers, but you are correct. He was injured prior to the mass volley of shooting.
So to follow that, he's shot at just about 10 o'clock. The shots into the crowd begin at 10:05 and go on for, we said at one point 11 minutes, but 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
So can you give us what you think?
Okay, I don't want to get in. I appreciate what you're saying, Ken.
Receipts that have been obtained from the valet security system.
Ma'am, that's not how we conduct this service, okay? If I'm presented with a question,
Timeline change? Because the FBI has reported that...
that's not how I conduct press conferences,
Well,
ma'am.
has the official timeline changed? Because...
Please stop asking your question. There's a decorum that we have here, and I will finish Mr. Ritter's question.
Thank you. So if Officer Campos or Security Guard Campos was shot at just before 10 o'clock, and the shots out the window, as you described them, there were two...
So let me help you with that, Ken, because you picked up on it. Yes, the timeline associated with the original shot and Mr. Campos has changed through investigation, as I have conveyed to you from the very beginning. And your zest for information and my zest to ensure the public safety and the calming of their minds is some things are going to change. Now, they are minute changes. Okay, there's not this all-encompassing answer associated with the information that we presented before. In other words, it's not completely inaccurate. But what we have learned is Mr. Campos was encountered by the suspect prior to his shooting to the outside world. Yes, ma'am.
Sheriff, you referenced the comprehension profile that's being drawn up. Can you talk about what thread your department is looking at regarding the shooter's mental condition and how important that is to your investigation?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by thread.
Like what avenues are you guys going down looking at his mental health?
Well, as you can imagine, anything that any mental health or medical help he's had throughout his life, we're attempting to obtain any and all information associated with that. Additionally, the behavioral analysis unit from the FBI is on the ground here locally, and we're attempting to utilize their expertise in discerning those matters. What I will provide with you is behavioral analysis is in LA also, Los Angeles, while interviews with Ms. Danley are being conducted.
Do you have any idea why Mr. Campos was near that room when he got shot prior to the actual...
Yes, we had an alarm associated with an open door. It was not the suspect's open door, it was another one.
Sure.
Yes.
Were there any other writings discovered in the room, either numbers or otherwise?
I'm not aware of any. I personally am not aware of any.
Sure. Were there any diagnoses that he had that you can share? Anything about his? You talked to the medical thing as part of the investigation. Is there anything he was diagnosed with or was taking that you can comment
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Was he diagnosed with any conditions, or was he taking any?
No, we don't have a complete comprehensive evaluation of his mental condition. We will provide that as we become aware of it.
Sir, so after Mr. Campos was shot, before the mass shooting happened, did he alert security? Did they know? I'm just wondering if there's was any delay in his reporting? Or?
No, he immediately upon being injured notified security of his situation. In close proximity of Mr. Campos being shot, there was also a maintenance worker that presented himself on the 32nd floor, and Mr. Campos prevented him from receiving any injuries.
Sheriff, do you think the suspect's engagement with Mr. Campos maybe sped up the timeline of the shooter?
I would not make that assumption. I'm not privy to that.
There's actually two questions.
What was Mr. Paddock doing before the shooting? Is there any evidence that he was gambling that same night, or do you have any video evidence of what he was doing?
We have a pretty comprehensive timeline prior to the shooting, but more importantly, it's up in the public forum. He was gambling the night before. I do not want to disclose his actions up to the shooting because that's part of the investigation.
To end Mr. Paddock's actions, what caused him to stop shooting out the window? Do we know?
We do not know at this point.
And then to follow, you have said earlier you believe he had an escape plan. Do you still think that?
Yeah, I mean, that's been a matter of discussion out there, whether what I said is accurate or not, and what I am comfortable with saying is what I believe. Mr. Campos, not Mr. Campos, I'm sorry, the suspect, I don't want to say the suspect's name, I will call him the suspect. We know that he attempted to shoot at the fuel tanks. We know that he had some personal protection equipment in the room. We know that the car that was down in the parking garage still contained binary explosives. So I would be comfortable in saying, which I believe, depending on the splash he made during the shooting, would it enable the first responders to be directing their attention in other locations, which would enable Mr. Paddock to just leave the hotel. And we do not know whether he had planned to cause additional harm outside of what occurred at Mandalay Bay.
Was there ever a trigger mechanism found that would have led to the car?
A trigger mechanism?
We talked about finding electronics in the room. We talked about
Oh, you mean something that would no, the explosives were not set up in order to detonate with a trigger.
So, Sheriff, is it your belief?
Yes, ma'am.
Did the security guard, and when did the police know that the security guard was shot? Before the gunshots at 10:05 p.m. or only after the active shooting began?
They weren't aware of him being shot until they met him in the hallway after exiting the elevator.
Sheriff, when did he check into the hotel?
What medication?
And what date did he check into the hotel?
Best of my recollection, we have information on the 25th. I had told you previously the 28th. We're trying to confirm his actions between the 25th and the 28th. I'm under the belief that he was not occupying the room between those days.
Sure.
What medication specifically was he taking?
I already said that, ma'am. I can't answer that question now.
Can you address specifically, you said that you don't want to say the suspect's name. Can you just briefly talk about why that is?
Why? Because I don't want to sensationalize his actions. I believe if he doesn't have a name, nobody can relate to him.
Sure.
Yes, sir, in the back.
In recent days, we've heard reports about the cell phones found in the suspect's room. How many cell phones were found, and was there any sort of indication that he might have been communicating with anybody?
Aaron, do you have that information?
I don't think it's prudent to give that out.
Okay, no, we don't have that number. I don't know the number personally.
Sure. You mentioned that something about how you observed his movements over 200 times in the valley. Can you talk about where he was going, what he was doing?
No, I can't reach. I wish I could give you a comprehensive timeline and his movements. That would assist us in developing possible witnesses, but we're still running that down. It's still a really comprehensive evaluation of all the electronic equipment associated with this individual, and that's going to take quite some time. What I am proud of is how far we've gotten to this point. And yes, I'm frustrated. If you look in the public media, the perception that I am frustrated at the speed of this investigation? Yes, I am. It isn't because nobody is not doing their job. It's because this individual purposely hid his actions leading up to this event, and it is difficult for us to find the answers to those actions. And that's why it's important for you to give me some deference, the FBI some deference, and the police department some deference to the ability to run out these leads. Now, I have noticed in the public forum several assumptions, unconfirmed statements, and actions of this individual put out there, and it makes it very difficult for us to follow the leads that we currently have when we're trying to chase our tail in other directions. And I have said this to you before. I appreciate all your help. You're a force multiplier for us because there's a lot of hidden pieces to this puzzle, but there's also a happy medium associated with that. And I will answer Mr. Ritter's question. That will be the last question.
I know you we learned yesterday that the FBI went again to the Mesquite house. Did the FBI also go back to Reno, that house there, and the vehicles? Are we recombing? Perhaps you can tell us if we're recombing evidence.
Yes, we are. The question was, is the FBI, along with the LVMPD, revisiting the crimes or the personal property of the suspect? Yes, that is accurate. Along with the behavioral analysis detectives, they are also present, and maybe we can discern some additional evidence as a result of that revisit. Okay, thank you very much. And like I said previously, we anticipate the next press conference to be Friday. Barring any key evidence that we become aware of, we'll plan on Friday. Thank you very much.
Las Vegas Metropolitan Sheriff Joe Lombardo wrapping up where they are in this investigation and frankly admitting that there is not a lot of progress on the motive behind Stephen Paddock, the shooter who killed 58 people and wounded hundreds more, saying there's no evidence of a second shooter at all, no evidence of any tie with terrorist groups or terrorist ideologies as of yet, evidence that he was taking medication, wouldn't go into the specifics, said that a security guard at Mandalay Bay Campos was actually shot before the attack, before the shooting on the concert goers. That timeline we didn't know before, and would not say why Paddock stopped shooting or what caused the shooter to stop shooting that night. Said that there was a possible escape, but wouldn't go into specifics. Said that he had shot at fuel tanks across the street, and that there in the parking garage was in fact a car, as we had heard of, filled with explosives, and that it was the sheriff's belief that he had plans possibly to do other things after that shooting that night. We will continue to update this investigation as we get more. As he said, the next news conference likely not until Friday unless they break through with something. Now to other news that we're following today. The Trump administration wants action on immigration, and they're giving Congress an ultimatum. It can protect 800,000 so-called dreamers if lawmakers also adhere to a list of principles to crack down on illegal immigration. The president's plan includes constructing a border wall with Mexico, adding 10,000 immigration officers, and penalizing sanctuary cities. The guidelines came out the same day Republican Senator Bob Corker took President Trump to task in a highly personal and public feud. What began with a spat on Twitter over political support turned into the retiring GOP senator suggesting the president treats the office like a reality show and his actions could start World War III. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is on the North Lawn tonight with two of those big stories coming out of the White House tonight. Good evening, Kristen.
Good evening, Bret. This list of demands represents a complete overhaul of U.S. immigration policy. It ranges from improving border security to beefing up enforcement, and at the very top of the list is his signature campaign promise. President Trump is telling lawmakers to fund and build his border wall, or else any deal protecting dreamers is dead. In a letter to Congress yesterday, he said that, quote, these findings outline reforms that must be included as part of any legislation addressing the status of deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA recipients. Other reforms include stopping sanctuary cities by denying federal funding, hiring 10,000 additional ICE agents and 300 prosecutors, establishing a point-based system for green cards, and ending asylum abuse and chain migration. That's when the extended family of legal immigrants are given a smooth path into the country. The list is being praised by his base as proof of a president keeping his campaign promise. But it's being slammed by Democrats like Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro, who says it lacks basic humanity.
This proposal is a Breitbart Christmas list of anti-immigrant policies. And as many of us have said, it's a non-starter in Congress. It's dead on arrival.
It's also different from the deal the top two Democrats on Capitol Hill thought they'd struck over dinner at the White House a few weeks ago. Chuck and Nancy, as the president likes to call them, say that, quote, this proposal fails to represent any attempt at compromise. The list includes the wall, which was explicitly ruled out of the negotiations.
The message to the Dreamers is that listen to what the president says. He says he's open to a deal. So they should actually be calling their friends Chuck and Nancy to say, you know, are you going to give up this deal?
President Trump spent the Columbus Day holiday playing golf with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham just one day after picking a fight on Twitter with another Republican senator. Quote, Senator Bob Corker begged me to endorse him for re-election in Tennessee. I said no, and he dropped out. Said he could not win without my endorsement. He also wanted to be Secretary of State. I said no thanks. He's also largely responsible for the horrendous Iran deal. Corker responded by saying it's a shame the White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning. The comments mark a seismic shift in the relationship between the president and a man who was once a contender to be his vice president. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee then told the New York Times that he believes the president's threat to other countries could put the nation, quote, on the path to World War III. He also said, quote, he concerns me. He would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation, and that the vast majority of our caucus understands what we're dealing with here. Now, Senator Corker didn't explain what exactly he meant by that, nor has President Trump responded, but the vice president just defended him by saying that he's, quote, achieving real results on the international stage while critics engage in empty rhetoric and baseless attacks. Bret.
Kristen Fisher live on the North Lawn. Kristen, thank you. ESPN is sidelining one of its anchors after a second controversial tweet. The company putting out a statement today saying it is suspending Jemele Hill for 2 weeks for violating its social media guidelines. Hill called for a boycott of Dallas Cowboys advertisers in the wake of reports that team owner Jerry Jones will bench any player who does not stand for the national anthem. Last month, Hill created uproar after she called President Trump a, quote, white supremacist on Twitter. Vice President Pence is in California this week, but it's his visit to Indiana Sunday that most people are still talking about. The Vice President walked out of a football game between the Indianapolis Colts and the San Francisco 49ers after some players knelt during the national anthem. He said it was because he did not want to dignify the demonstration. Vice President's actions were also praised by President Trump on Twitter, drawing many to conclude that this was a stunt orchestrated by the administration because many in the NFL, especially on the 49ers, have been kneeling in protest for weeks.
Last time he's been to a Colts game 3 years ago. So this looks like a PR stunt to me. He knew our team has had the most players protest. He knew that we were probably going to do it again.
Senior political analyst Bret Hume joins me now with his take. Good evening, Bret. Well, I mean, there's all this talk about a stunt, but obviously the kneeling is its own kind of stunt in a way, suggests, you know, making whatever point they want to make. But what's your take on this?
Well, I think you can take the view that says the players are performing these stunts, some of them week in and week out, and the administration, the person of Vice President Pence, have responded to that by a kind of a counter stunt. I think you can say they're both stunts, or they're neither are stunts. I don't see how anybody could seriously argue that what the players have been doing is not a stunt, and what the vice president did is a stunt. So I think any kind of sensible and balanced look at this thing would say that they're both doing the same thing. These are political actions, Bret. Both of them are political actions. The administration tonight, I guess, or the Trump team is trying to fundraise off this. This is what you expect with political acts, that they think they have a winner here, that the overwhelming majority of fans and the overwhelming majority of voters will side with the president and his vice president on this idea of respecting the national anthem, and they can fundraise off of it.
So politically, in your mind, this is a winner for the administration, despite the hackles about the trip to Indianapolis costing X amount of dollars and stepping on Peyton Manning's big night or whatever they're saying in Indianapolis?
I'm somewhat amused by a lot of liberal critics of the vice president suddenly developed a deep concern about our budget after years in which the deficit was exploding, and now they're concerned about this. My sense about this is what happened is the vice president was going out there to his home state and his home team's event to celebrate the career of Peyton Manning, who won a Super Bowl while playing for the Indianapolis Colts, and they had an event before the game for him to honor him, and I think he was principally there for that. I have no doubt that he and the president decided ahead of time that if the players were to stage or to kneel, that he would walk out. I think it probably was planned. But, politics on both sides, seems to me.
All right, Bret, as always, thank you.
You bet.
The Trump administration takes a swipe at President Obama's landmark climate agenda by keeping a campaign promise to coal country. How he plans to do that next. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is reiterating the U.S. military will be ready for action against North Korea if it comes to that.
So there's one thing the U.S. Army can do, and that is you have got to be ready to ensure that we have military options that our president can employ if needed.
Mattis was speaking at an Army conference here in Washington. He also recommended a book on the Korean War to remind people what war on the peninsula could look like. The Dow closed out this Monday down nearly 13. The S&P 500 was off almost 5. The Nasdaq closed down 10.5. The Trump administration is taking a swipe at President Obama's landmark climate agenda. As we said, keeping a campaign promise made to coal country. This week, the administration will begin repealing the Clean Power Plan. Environmental Protection Agency Chief Scott Pruitt made the announcement today in Kentucky alongside Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, in a move that, as you can imagine, is already infuriating critics. Correspondent Griff Jenkins has our report from Hazard, Kentucky tonight.
Tomorrow in Washington, D.C., I'll be signing a proposed rule to withdraw the so-called Clean Power Plan of the past administration.
It was welcomed news in eastern Kentucky. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt announcing the administration's proposal to repeal President Obama's signature climate regulation.
There's lots of uncertainty across the country about the legality of the Clean Power Plan. Lots of questions about whether the authority is there in the Clean Air Act. And so we're going to withdraw that and move forward.
Created in 2015, the Clean Power Plan, or CPP, was Obama's policy answer to reducing carbon emissions at power plants nationwide.
By 2030, carbon pollution from our power plants will be 32% lower than it was a decade ago.
But the Supreme Court stayed its implementation in 2016 after legal challenges from 27 states, led by then Attorney General of Oklahoma, Scott Pruitt.
It's because they believed there was a likelihood that that was not lawful.
Not everyone agrees. The Sierra Club supported this CPP and says any repeal of it will cost lives. Quote, the damage caused by Trump's willful ignorance will now have myriads of human faces because he's proposing to throw out a plan that would prevent thousands of premature deaths and tens of thousands of childhood asthma attacks every year. In coal country, Kentucky Senator and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the announcement is a step in the right direction.
This is a sign of hope. It's clear, as the administrator said, the war on coal is over. It doesn't necessarily mean overnight a return to some of the years that we had a while back.
And for mining machinery company owners like John Combs, it's a chance to rebuild business.
Our company grew from 26 employees to 64. And then over the last 7 or 8 years, we're down to 23, 24 people. And the future looks bright, and we are certainly implementing the necessary steps to grow with it.
The effort to repeal CPP will almost certainly be met by new legal challenges. While here in eastern Kentucky, there were more than 15,000 coal mining jobs when President Obama took office. Today, there's less than 4,000. Bret?
Griff, thank you. Christopher Columbus becomes part of the national debate over historical monuments coming up on this Columbus Day. A look at the explorer's past that's now under fire. First years of some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. WSVN in Miami, where Miami Dolphins offensive line coach Chris Forrester resigned today after a video surfaced on social media appearing to show him snorting cocaine. The team said they have, quote, no tolerance for this behavior and accepted his resignation. Forrester said he accepts full responsibility for his actions and is seeking treatment. Fox 25 in Biloxi, where Hurricane Nate made landfall over the weekend as a Category 1. The storm surge from the Mississippi Sound littered Biloxi's main beachfront highway with debris and flooded a casino's lobby and parking structure. However, there were no storm-related deaths reported and no signs of widespread damage. And this is a live look at Oakland, California from Fox 2, our affiliate there. The big story there tonight, more than a dozen wildfires that have destroyed more than 1,500 homes and buildings in wine country. California's governor today issued a state of emergency for Napa, Sonoma, and Yuba counties due to the fires. Gusty winds have fanned the flames and smoke, forcing the evacuation of some 20,000 people, including a new evacuation of the Silverado Resort that just finished a PGA tournament last week. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Michigan's chief medical executive now faces a charge of involuntary manslaughter over the Flint water crisis. Dr. Eden Wells was in court for a hearing today on other charges when the announcement was made by the state's attorney general's office. 5 other people have been charged with involuntary manslaughter tied to an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the Flint area starting in 2014. It was the moment many critics cringed over, the video of President Trump throwing paper towels to hurricane survivors during a visit to Puerto Rico last week. Many were wondering just what the president was thinking at that moment. Well, now we know. In an interview with former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, the president said the people loved those actions.
They had these beautiful soft towels, very good towels. And I came in and there was a crowd of a lot of people and they were screaming and they were loving everything. And I was having fun. They were having fun. They said, throw them to me, Mr. President. And so I'm doing.
The president also told Huckabee that this was just another example of the media not treating him fairly. It is Columbus Day, a national holiday here in the U.S., but one that doesn't come without controversy. Recently, statues honoring Christopher Columbus have become part of the national debate over historical monuments, as protests have defaced some of those markers around the country. Tonight, correspondent Doug McElway shows us the past of a celebrated and now targeted explorer.
The truth about Columbus is that he didn't really bring anything other than genocide and slavery and violence to indigenous people of this land, and he's not somebody who should be celebrated.
It is an increasingly common sentiment about Christopher Columbus. 4 states and 55 cities are now celebrating October 9th as Indigenous Peoples Day.
Christopher Columbus represents genocide!
New York's Columbus Circle statue remains under 24-hour guard. This fall, it was among scores of Columbus monuments across the U.S. to have been vandalized. Traditionalists see the movement as an anti-intellectual revisionist history enabled by a mob mentality.
What these organizations are doing to try to deface Columbus statues is un-American, and it's outrageous.
On college campuses, too, the pendulum has swung far to one side. The Chronicle of Higher Education reporting on Saturday that an essay entitled "The Case for Colonialism" has been withdrawn due to credible threats of personal violence to the journal's editor. No wonder that scholar William Connell, who sees both good and bad in Columbus, treads carefully when asked about revisionist history.
History's always being revised. I prefer the word correction.
Connell acknowledges Columbus enslaved the people of Hispaniola, where he first landed. Their population was also decimated by measles and smallpox carried by the Europeans.
Scholars now estimate between 50 and 90% of the population in the Americas died because of this.
But he notes indigenous people were infecting the Europeans with an especially virulent form of syphilis, and that indigenous people, far from being peaceful as Columbus detractors wish, were often at war with each other.
I'm a historian, so I like to preserve evidence. So I'm generally opposed to erasing our history. I'd rather have us learn about it.
That appears to be the consensus of more than 1,000 New Yorkers who signed a petition urging Mayor Bill de Blasio to preserve Columbus statues in the city. Last month, de Blasio gave a special commission until December 7th to submit recommendations of what to do with New York's Columbus statues.
No commission can undo Columbus's lasting influence. Nearly 40% of the world's Catholics live in Latin America, practicing the religion and speaking the language that Columbus first introduced there. Bret?
Happy Columbus Day. Doug, thanks. The oldest sitting senator in the U.S. Senate says she's ready to recommit and will run for re-election. California Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is 84 years old, announced her intentions today on Twitter, saying she's, quote, all in, ending months of speculation over her political future. Up next, debating the president's guidelines for immigration reform and his battle with Senator Bob Corker.